So ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started. Good afternoon to each of you. Thank you so much for coming to this, our second event, second annual event in solidarity with the persecuted. A little bit about my background. My name is Amjad Mahmood Khan. I teach and practice law in Los Angeles. I'm also a member of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. I have been asked to co-chair this year's Congressional Advocacy Day for the second annual International Religious Freedom Summit. This is a very important week here in DC. Tomorrow will begin the second annual event for the summit, and it's really an amazing journey. About a year and a half ago, our co-chair, Ambassador Sam Brownback, and alongside Dr. Katrina Lantos Swett, both had this idea of having an International Religious Freedom Summit with the express purpose of gathering members of civil society to focus on so many issues that are affecting persecuted communities. So the first inaugural event was held last year, and it was a great success for an inaugural event. But as part of that event, we didn't want to just be a talk shop. We wanted actually to have action come out of the summit. And one of the major objectives of all of the civil society actors that are gathered here is to engage with our leaders and lawmakers. That's essential work. It's the work that really changes policy. And of course, we're here at Capitol Hill, here at the Rayburn House building in the Gold Room. And this morning, we launched our Congressional Advocacy Day. We had a kickoff breakfast. And some of you may not know that we have had many meetings all day. We have over 70 organizations from different faith communities, such a diverse coalition here on Capitol Hill, taking meetings with Republicans and Democrats, independents in the Senate and the House side. Very pleased to report over 50 live meetings just in the last 6 hours, probably going to clear over 120 meetings by the morning. Even people who aren't here, who are so moved by this summit, are taking virtual meetings from their homes on this day in solidarity with the efforts that are happening. What is the focus of those meetings? It is around the protections for beleaguered communities, and really one singular message: religious freedom for everyone, everywhere now. And that's really powerful and important at a time when there is global conflict. What really makes us united is the ability to advocate for each other. Many of you are extraordinary advocates. You are advocates for your own communities. You are shining a spotlight on prisoners of conscience. You're shining a spotlight on crimes against humanity for your respective communities. And that is really critical work. But each of us who are not members of your community also have an obligation to speak for you, to be with you, to stand with you in this work. Today's event is about that, in solidarity with the persecuted, that the persecuted stand with the persecuted. And what I like to say, and I mentioned this last year, is that there are a number of great choruses, great strong voices, courageous voices in the audience and on Capitol Hill. Very rarely do you see a symphony. Very rarely do you have something like a summit to draw people together from different faith communities or people of no faith to come together to focus on really, really weighty issues. And so we have a terrific lineup today, and the format of this is also a bit unique. We wanted you to hear from some excellent speakers, people who are working in this space, both at a non-governmental level and at a governmental level. And we're delighted today to have with us the U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Criminal Justice, Dr. Beth Von Shak. It's really an amazing honor to have her here with us despite her busy schedule, and we'll be hearing from her shortly. But also we'll hear from several community representatives who will speak for each other. And last year we had 11 faith traditions represented in this moment. Some of you might remember that. This year, the focus is on the prevention of genocide. And we know that the US has made a determination for genocide for 3 communities recently, the Yazidi community, the Rohingya Muslim community, and also the Uyghur Muslim community. And these determinations are not small matters. They're giant matters. They take a lot of work to make, and they have real effect. These communities are suffering deeply, and all of us here stand in solidarity with them, and we'll hear from those representatives as well. So without further ado, I will invite the co-chair of this year's International Religious Freedom Summit, Dr. Katrina Lantos Swett, to kick things off. Dr. Katrina Lantos Swett is an extraordinary human rights advocate. She's been advocating in this space for many years. She's done so with incredible success. As chair of the US Commission on International Religious Freedom, she really galvanized that body. We just heard from USURF. Many of us were coming back from a USURF event earlier today. And under her leadership, that commission grew and the work and its importance grew. Her father, Tom Lantos, for whom the Human Rights Commission in this very hall, in this body of Congress is named the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. His reputation was fighting and defending the oppressed, and she's absolutely carrying on that work. She now is the president and chairperson of the Lantos Foundation for Human Rights and Justice. So, Katrina, you can kick things off for us.
Thank you so much. It's extraordinary to be here with so many wonderful friends. Many faces here are deeply familiar, but there are a lot of new faces, which is just as exciting. And I am really thrilled to be back here again. I want to pay tribute to my friend, and he's kind of a quiet superhero, and that's Amjad, who has led this effort and this really brilliant initiative to bring us together as advocates for each other. He grasps, and I think his whole community, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, grasp the essential oneness of those of us who are people of conscience in terms of the struggle we have and the duty we have and the fight that lies ahead of us. In thinking about both this theme of preventing genocide and standing in solidarity with other people of conscience who are threatened, I, of course, cannot help but think about my own late father. As Amjad mentioned, he was the only survivor of the Holocaust ever elected to serve in the United States Congress. And those experiences, those tragic and unimaginable experiences of his youth, led him to have a deep, deep sense of commitment to defending the rights of others. But there is a story that came to our family, not from my father, because like many Holocaust survivors, he did not talk much about what he had experienced during those times. But it came to us through a friend. And I want to share it with you today because I think it illustrates how central to our own integrity and identity it is to be true to who we are, to be true to our conscience, and how much of a difference it makes when someone is ready to stand with you and beside you. So in March of 1944, my father was a young Jewish teenage boy in Budapest, and that was when the Nazis occupied his native country. And that was really the beginning of the true nightmare for the Jews of Hungary. My dad, like many, many other young men at that time, was taken away to a slave labor camp outside of the capital of Budapest, where they lived in brutal conditions and great danger. But the commander, if you will, of the particular barracks that my father was imprisoned in got the idea in his head that he would require all of the Jewish boys in his barracks to, quote unquote, convert. I think he somehow thought this would burnish his reputation. Maybe he was just toying with them. But for whatever reason, this is what he ordered them to do. Now, these boys were terrified. They were alone. They were afraid. They were completely at his mercy and vulnerable. And so all of them did. All of them except two, my father and his best friend, who went on in subsequent years to become a distinguished doctor. And they refused this request, or this demand, if you will, that they convert and abandon the faith of their fathers. Now, from what I know of my dad at this time in his life, he was not a particularly religious young man. He believed in God. He was a member of his faith community, but it wasn't something that was central to his life. And sadly, to me as a person of faith, many of the things he endured at that time led him over time to a more skeptical agnosticism than he had had in his youth. But nonetheless, something in the heart of that young man, that boy in a position of incredible vulnerability and danger, knew that if he were to succumb to this trampling on his conscience rights, on his right, his responsibility to sort of own his own soul, as it were, that he would lose something very precious. And so despite the danger, he refused. He and his friend were very badly beaten for their refusal. But I like to think that maybe it was in that particular moment and that particular period of his crucible that the qualities of conscience integrity that would characterize his life and that would make him eventually such a fearless defender of the rights of others, that is sort of maybe that moment when that really took hold in him. Now, as some of you may know, into the hell and the horror and the terror that faced the Jewish community in Hungary in those days came a Swedish diplomat by the name of Raul Wallenberg. My mother says that they referred to him as their Moses from the north, that he had come to rescue them like Moses, and he was kind of almost a mythical and a legendary figure to the Jews of Budapest. He was responsible for saving both my father and my mother's life. My father a little more directly, my mother a little more indirectly. But what my sister and I often commented about in later years was that unlike many of the children of Holocaust survivors, whose parents bore a very, very heavy burden, almost a curse isn't quite the right word, but a heavy, heavy psychic burden because of what they had suffered. Our parents, despite all that they had been through, the family they had lost, the tremendous inhumanity that they had witnessed, nonetheless had a hopeful understanding of life and of the world. And that was because in the midst of their darkness, someone who had nothing in common with them, Raul Wallenberg was the scion of the Rockefellers of Sweden, one of the richest families in Sweden. Most of the Jews of Hungary were poor and persecuted. He was a Christian. They were Jews. He could have easily and happily lived out those dangerous war years in the security and comfort of neutral Sweden, and they found themselves in the midst of the fire. But he came there to help them because he recognized in them that despite all those differences, what they had in common was more important, this shared humanity, this brotherhood and sisterhood. And he was ready to put his life on the line, to stand with them, to interpose himself between danger and these at-risk people. And so when we grew up, my sister and I, we heard these stories alongside the stories of suffering. We heard this story of solidarity, of sacrifice, and of deep respect between people who were so different. And I've always been so grateful for that, and it informs me and my work to this day. So I thank you, Amjad, for the opportunity to sort of kick off what in many ways is going to be the most remarkable of all the wonderful things you're going to experience over the next 3 days as part of this conference. People walking in a way in those Wallenberg footsteps, standing up not to advocate for their own people who are suffering, but to speak in behalf of another community that is also suffering, because it is that solidarity, it is that recognition of our shared humanity, of our shared brotherhood and sisterhood. It is that recognition that we are indeed, we must be our brothers and sisters keepers, which is the strength that we want each of you to take not only from today, but from this whole summit. So I thank you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts, and I thank you all for being here. And I know, just looking around this room, that every single one of you is ready to shoulder that burden and to carry it forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Katrina. Always wonderful to hear these amazing stories. Dr. Katrina spoke at our breakfast this morning. Some of you were there as well. You have a real supply of amazing stories, and I'm looking forward to hearing some more through the summit. One of the reasons that we're drawn here is because religious freedom violations lead to genocide. There's a correlation there, and protecting religious freedom is leading on a path to prevent genocide. These issues are linked. And it is for this reason, as we thought about how to, put this program together and really bring people together, we thought it's incredibly crucial to not just decry crimes against humanity, but to actually hear from our ambassador at large for global criminal justice as to what the United States is doing for atrocity prevention. This is incredibly important work. It's tough work. It requires a lot of legal acumen and skill. And we're delighted that our keynote speaker this afternoon is Dr. Beth Von Shak, and she is a brilliant legal mind. I've known her work as a lawyer and law professor for years, but she's also a doer, and in a big way. And she thinks about these issues in a manner that really leads to change. She was sworn in earlier this year on March 17th as the 6th U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Criminal Justice. In that capacity, she serves the Secretary of State, Blinken, and other leaders in the department on issues related to atrocity prevention, and also that includes war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. As I mentioned, in this space, she's been working. She actually was the deputy ambassador in 2012 to 2013 as well. She comes with a wealth of experience. And we're very excited to hear from her on ways that the civil society here can really understand how this office is valuable to the work that we are all doing to protect religious freedom. Madam Ambassador.
Thank you so much, Amjad, for that kind introduction, and to you for your wonderful story that will, I hope, continue to inspire all of us. I've testified several times at the Lantos Commission, and it's always a huge honor to be able to appear before that body, which bears your father's name and your name. And congratulations to everyone who is organizing this summit for this now the second year. It's extremely exciting to see the momentum building around these issues. I'm honored to join you all today here on the panel with old and new friends now here to discuss these issues, and also to stand in solidarity with the persecuted, which is the theme of today's event. So I'm speaking today as the head of the State Department's Office of Global Criminal Justice. This was the brainchild of Secretary Madeleine Albright, may she rest in peace and power. She worked tirelessly with the war crimes tribunals in The Hague to make sure that the United States was supportive of those efforts. And she wanted an office to run point, essentially, on these issues. And that is now my office. And I can attest that the repression of religious minorities, religious groups, and particularly minority groups is often, as Amjad mentioned, a precursor to and also a component of the crime of genocide. And we've seen this now around the world. It's been the case for the Yazidi, for Rohingya, for Uyghurs and other ethnic and religious minorities in Xinjiang and around the world. In 2016, Secretary of State John Kerry announced that ISIS, the Islamic State, was responsible for genocide against Yazidis, and in addition to against Christians and Shia Muslims. He further noted that ISIS was responsible for crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing against these same groups, and also against Sunni Muslims, Kurds, and other minorities within the overlapping conflicts within Iraq and Syria. In 2017, Secretary Tillerson determined that ethnic cleansing was being committed against Rohingya, who, as we know, are predominantly Muslim. And then following an extensive documentation effort, Secretary Blinken determined last March that members of the Burmese military were committing genocide against Rohingya, as well as crimes against humanity. And then in January 2021, the State Department determined that genocide and crimes against humanity are also being committed against Uyghurs within Xinjiang. These department atrocity determinations follow a rigorous process within our interagency process and within the Department of State generally. Department practice surrounding these determinations has varied over time, but it often includes a review of a whole range of types of documentation from independent and impartial sources. This includes civil society groups who share information with the department, also independent journalists who are often on the ground, taking testimony, documenting what they're seeing, as well as we draw upon our own intelligence and other fact-gathering sources. All of these sources of information fuse together to inform our atrocities determinations. Now, in making these determinations, which often are made public, we hope to accomplish a number of interlocking goals, I guess they could be called. One, of course, is to acknowledge the truth of what is happening, the harms that victims and survivors are experiencing, and the crimes under international and domestic law that they are suffering. We also hope to raise global awareness of these issues within other governments who are like-minded and also within multilateral organizations. We hope to galvanize support and assistance to victim and survivor groups around the world. We hope to raise the cost of complicity in these actions around the world. We hope to promote steps to preserve, collect, and ultimately use documentation about what we're seeing. And then ultimately, we hope to support efforts around justice for survivors and victims and accountability for those who are responsible. As we make these characterizations, we are drawing upon international and domestic law. So as many in this room will know, the crime of genocide, what sets it apart from other international crimes is it involves the specific intent to destroy a group, and a certain number of groups are listed, include ethnic, racial, religious, and national groups, in whole or in substantial part. But it's important to remember that genocide is not the only atrocity crime that exists under international law. There's also a set of crimes called crimes against humanity. This crime traces its origins to the post-World War II period, Nuremberg and Tokyo tribunals, and it involves a constellation of acts that are prohibited under international law when they're committed as part of a widespread or a systematic attack against a civilian community, a civilian population. Persecution, if on this widespread or systematic basis, is one of the enumerated acts, and we know that persecution can be committed along religious grounds, in addition to a whole range of other grounds, political, et cetera. For example, the U.S. determination that crimes against humanity are being committed within Xinjiang involves a number of enumerated crimes against humanity. This includes prolonged arbitrary detention of Uyghur and other ethnic and religious minorities, severe deprivation of physical liberty, enforced sterilizations, torture, and other forms of mistreatment of those who are in custodial or detention situations, and the broad sort of umbrella crime of persecution. And this can include the use of forced labor and the imposition of draconian measures to prevent individuals from practicing their religious beliefs. And other forms of persecution include limitations on freedom of expression, on assembly, freedom of movement. Persecution is this umbrella concept that governs, that can address all of these various violations of international human rights. Secretary Blinken also determined that crimes against humanity are being committed within Burma by the Burmese military. And this includes evidence of a widespread or a systematic attack against Rohingya communities, including sexual violence, the targeting of religious leaders, places of worship, torture, and other horrific abuses. So I hope that the existence of my office and the importance that we place upon these issues sends a signal that the U.S. government cares deeply about these issues. We do stand in solidarity with the persecuted. We are open to information sharing. We welcome your feedback on our work. We want to lift the voices of survivors and their families and their communities. We want to enable the sharing and preservation of their stories. And we do so all while calling for justice and accountability for these events. Now, what more do? We have long supported efforts around justice and accountability for atrocity crimes, and we're committed to working with whatever tools we have. We do have a very robust genocide statute. Unfortunately, that statute has never been used, in part given the timing of when it was enacted, and in part given the fact that perpetrators have not found their way to the United States such that we can activate that statute. We do not have a Crimes Against Humanity statute yet. Many of our friends and allies around the world, including members of NATO and other multilateral organizations with which we are involved, do have crimes against humanity within their federal penal code. There are now proposals floating around to rectify this gap within Title 18, which is the federal penal code. So that would go a long way towards being able to prosecute acts of religious persecution if perpetrators are within the jurisdictional reach of the United States. Now, where we can, we support international investigations, and the United Nations has created a whole number of investigative bodies, one devoted to Syria, one devoted to Myanmar, one devoted to Iraq, and all of them are very focused on documenting acts of religious persecution, including crimes against humanity, war crimes, and potentially genocide. The United States also can use a whole range of sanctions, including travel bars, financial sanctions, export controls, import controls and restrictions on individuals and entities that are associated with abuses. We're also trying to robustly implement the Elie Wiesel Genocide and Atrocities Prevention Act, which invites the U.S. government to explore a whole range of measures that can be used to prevent abuses and to identify and target and focus on those who are ultimately most responsible. And we work ultimately with our friends and allies around the world. I was in The Hague last month with the Atrocities Prevention Working Group, with a number of like-minded states who also care deeply about this work and are building their foreign policy around it. Finally, as this hearing attests, all elements of the U.S. government are focused on this work. We're committed to pursuing truth and justice on behalf of survivors, victims, their families, their wider communities, and also accountability for those responsible. And we do this not only because it is a moral imperative, but also it is within U.S. national interest. And we know that the American people also care deeply about these issues. So I'm so honored to be here with you today. I look forward to hearing from others on the panel and to continuing to engage on these issues moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Von Schaack. I think what we've learned is there are a lot of tools in our toolkit that we really need to pursue in order to redress global injustices. And when you work on the Hill and you take enough meetings, you realize that there's a world of policy choices. And it's up to those of us who are part of communities who are suffering to not just share the stories of our brothers and sisters who are suffering, but actually hone in on the right vocabulary, the right positioning of what to do to actually move the needle on these issues. Something like the determination of a genocide takes a whole host of lawyers and legal determinations and machinations and interests, but at the end of the day, it takes courage. And we've seen in 3 different administrations, in a transpartisan way, that the United States, we are a courageous people and a courageous country. To actually decry atrocities and label them as genocide takes a lot of moral clarity and moral courage. And it's happened. There's hope. And for those communities who are looking at the atrocities committed to your brothers and sisters and are seeing that these religious freedom deprivations are going down a path that could lead to a potential genocide, You don't want to wait years for a determination like that to be made. You need to, in a way, sound the alarm and explain to people what is happening in historical context. And so we're really appreciative that we have this guidance coming at such a high level for those of you who are in this room, and of course those who are listening on the live stream, and of course those who are attending the summit. Our next speaker is Naomi Kikoler. She's the director of the Simon-Skjodt Center for the Prevention of Genocide, which is connected to the U.S. Holocaust Museum Memorial. Naomi worked as deputy director there. She had led policy engagement for years. Her work on bearing witness countries include the undertaking of documentation. That was the Commission of Genocide by the Islamic State, ISIS. This was really painstaking work, tremendous work. I've read those reports, useful information. We're really delighted to have Naomi because she represents the voice of those nonprofit organizations, those courageous advocates who are in the space focusing on this issue and shining a spotlight on all communities and atrocity prevention. So Naomi.
Thank you so much, Amjad. On behalf of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, it's a deep honor to be able to participate today and in this week's Earth Summit. I want to thank Amjad for hosting, and I'd like to thank Dr. Katrina Lantos Swett and Ambassador Brownback for your steadfast and passionate championing of these issues. As we gather here today, there are hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs who are detained with their loved ones yearning to find them. Close to 1 million Rohingya who live in crowded and dangerous refugee camps unable to return home. Yazidi mothers and fathers longing for their kidnapped girls and boys. Hazara families wondering if they can go to a mosque or a hospital without being killed in an attack. What binds each of them and their communities is that they have been targeted on the basis of their religious identity. Our institution serves to preserve the history of Katrina and my own family's history, as well as 6 million others who experienced what happens when religious persecution goes unchecked. Our institution is a symbol of the resilience of survivors. We stand humbly by the courage of the survivors joining us here today, our good friends, Wai Wai, Rushan, and Pari. But we're also an institution that seeks to ensure that future generations do not face similar persecution. Sadly, as so many of you know here, too many do today. The purpose of this week cannot be mere rhetoric. The survivors have been given enough false promises. This week must be about action, and a few points from us in that regard. 1, we know that prevention is possible, that early engagement to respond to emerging warning signs is a cost-effective alternative to waiting until mass atrocities have started. When you wait until the warning signs are glaring or the crimes have started, you have fewer tools available to prevent and halt the crimes, and the cost of using them has risen dramatically. We know that having processes and individuals within governments tasked with prioritizing protecting religious freedoms matters. These positions, which the US has, as well as a robust office, should be tasked to look for the early warning signs of atrocities and escalate the concerns of civil society to the highest levels. In the US, Congress has played a critical role in strengthening early warning through the Elie Wiesel Genocide and Atrocity Prevention Act. It serves as an example of how legislatures can play an important role in prevention. 2, many of you are on the front lines. You see the worrying trends. You live with the repercussions of failure to protect. Your warnings, be it of crackdowns on freedom of assembly, sharing one's culture with your children, discriminatory practices and persecution, dehumanizing language against you, can be warning signs of more ominous things to come. They should help trigger policy focus and resources. It has been the honor of a lifetime to work with Pari, Wai Wai, and Rushan. You bear the weight of your communities on your shoulders. Your voices must be heard, prioritized, and made central to the strategies to protect and crucially advance justice. and support given to you as individuals and to your organizations for what will be the long road ahead. 3, to act requires political will, and so often individual leadership of those in governments. Individuals who need to advocate for vulnerable communities against those within your own bureaucracies who argue that other interests, be they political or economic, take precedence over preventing mass atrocity crimes or crucially seeking accountability. This is a false narrative. Atrocity crimes endanger our security and economy, as well as our values. Preventing mass atrocities, protecting religious freedoms, will reinforce, not counter, our political and economic strength, and they remain a moral imperative. 4, we know that when religious freedom is denied, when anti-Semitism, extremism, Islamophobia, and a myriad of other forms of discrimination against religious communities is allowed to fester, other vulnerable communities also will be at heightened risk, and a state's prosperity and stability undermined. During the Holocaust, the persecution began with the targeting of the disabled, then focused on the Jews, the Roma, Jehovah's Witness, LGBTQ communities, and innocent others. We can't allow apathy or indifference to prevail. As museum founder and Holocaust survivor and Nobel Prize winner Elie Wiesel said, "Let us remember, what hurts the victim most is not the cruelty of the oppressor, but the silence of the bystander." May this week deepen our resolve to combat the cruelty and the silence. 5, and finally, my grandmother's tombstone includes her Hebrew name, Miriam Bat Gedaliahu B. Esther Devora, and the name that the Nazis gave her. Though it is not a name, it is a number, 48145, an attempt to destroy her identity and deny her existence. They did not succeed. Her tombstone says that she was a woman of unshakable faith and indomitable courage. Irrespective of whether you are a person of religious belief or not, may we all have the faith that we can build a better world and the courage to understand that it is in each of our government's national security interest to act on behalf of the persecuted. For survivors in the room and those that will be joining us this week, time is of the essence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naomi. Very powerful words. This afternoon, we will be hearing from 3 extraordinary individuals, and they will be speaking briefly about each other's communities. The first speaker is Wai Wai Nu. She's a member of the Rohingya Muslim community. The Rohingya community, as all of us have seen, these horrifying images coming out of Myanmar and the genocide that's happening to this beautiful people, this beautiful community. Wai Wai Nu emerged from 7 years as a political prisoner to become a human rights advocate and the founder of 2 organizations, the Women Peace Network and the Yangon Youth Center. Through the Women Peace Network, Wai Wai works to build peace and mutual understanding between Myanmar's ethnic communities and to empower marginalized women throughout Myanmar. Her extraordinary story was shared at last year's summit, but today we ask Wai Wai to speak on the persecuted Yazidi community.
Thank you very much, Amjad, and thank you for this opportunity to stand here today in solidarity with Yazidi community, Uyghur, and all other persecuted community. Again, my name is Wai Wai Nu. I am from the Rohingya community, serving as Executive Director of Women's Peace Network, and I'm here to speak for the Yazidi community because the persecuted stand with the persecuted. The Yazidi community in Iraq remain heavily traumatized and vulnerable nearly 8 years since the Yazidi genocide began. The Yazidi were targeted by the Islamic State or ISIS militant because they are not Muslim. Thousands of Yazidis were killed or kidnapped in August 2014 prompting the United States and several other competent authorities to recognize the Yazidis' genocide. 8 years later, the Yazidi majority area of Sinjar remained dilapidated and in despair with limited basic services or infrastructure. Some Yazidis have returned to their areas of origin, but more than 200,000 remain internally displaced, mostly living in tent or unfurnished buildings. Even in the last week, Turkish airstrikes have targeted Yazidis in Sinjar in a civilian area, killing a small child. Many thousands have immigrated from Iraq. The United States played a heroic role in August 2014 and targeted ISIS with airstrikes to prevent the massacre of Yazidis stranded on Mount Sinjar. Both Obama and Trump administration recognized the Yazidi genocide and furthered effort to support the Yazidi community. Unfortunately, community remains at great risk. With very little assistance from the Iraq or KRG government, the Yazidi community suffer from marginalization, discriminations, security threat, and a severe lack of basic needs, including housing, food, and non-food items. The young generation has less access to education and job opportunities. Assistance on all levels be needed if the Yazidi community is to exist in Iraq in the future. The US genocide determination was of immense value to Yazidi activists and the whole community. Yazidis have suffered persecutions and massacres for centuries, including throughout the durations of the Ottoman Empire. In the last decade, the suffering of this small community was finally recognized by the outside world. A terrible aspect of the crimes historically committed against Yazidi has been lack of awareness and public recognition. For this reason, understanding, naming, and acknowledging these egregious violations is a first step to building a new future and a new understanding where Yazidi have inalienable rights. Not rights granted by the states or regional powers, but fundamental rights that must never be violated again. Yazidi allies in the international community and first and foremost, the United States are critical to ensuring the existence of this endangered ethno-religious minority in Iraq. It is from our common hope for justice that I today proudly stand with my friend Pari Ibrahim and the entire Yazidi community. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wai Wai. Very powerful. We see the persecution of the Uyghur community, the headlines, the images, the stories, and they're heart-wrenching. I've gotten to know our next speaker a bit and her story as well. That's Roshan Abbas. Her own story, the story of her sister, the story that her community has endured is searing. It's searing to one's psyche. She founded the Campaign for Uyghurs, an organization to advocate and promote human rights and democratic freedoms for Uyghur Muslims and to mobilize the international community to stop these atrocities in East Turkestan. And Roshan, this is her life's mission. This is her life's work. I've seen it. I see how many people she meets, how many people she engages. She works with groups all over the world, here in America, Canada, the UK, parts of Europe, Australia, Japan, Turkey, with one singular aim is to raise awareness for her own community and again to support and empower particularly Uyghur Muslim women and youth for activism. Today, Roshan Abbas speaks for the beleaguered Rohingya community.
Thank you, Amjad. And thank you, Dr. Katrina Lantos, and thank you, Ambassador Naomi, for those powerful words. I had the opportunity to meet with the great late Congressman Tom Lantos and Mrs. Lantos like 25 years ago. What a pioneer of the human rights. What a heroic action that he led in the Hill. So thank you for everything that you are continuing. I'm here to speak for the Rohingya community because the persecuted stand with the persecuted. For generations, Rohingya in Burma have been systematically deprived of their basic human rights and dignity. To speaking about people in Burma, I also want to recognize Ambassador Joseph Reed for his years of work, the people in Burma, and the defend and advocating for the population in Burma. The Rohingya people are subject to acts of state-sponsored persecution, including the most brutal forms of sexual violence and the restricted of religion, health, education, marriage, and the birth. As was shared by the community, as well as the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's special exhibition entitled Burma's Path to Genocide. Rohingya's history and the survival reminds us of how, in our world, marginalized communities can be discriminated, hated, targeted, and destroyed. Today, the over 1 million forcibly displaced Rohingya community continues to risk everything for their protection, but to no avail. Across Southeast Asia, Rohingya remain confined in squalid refugee camps, denied basic needs and the livelihood, and subject to hate speech, sexual violence, and other grave rights violence. For seeking refugee, Rohingya continues to be detained and arrested, and now risk being deported to Burma, their home, where the military has further ravaged upon overthrowing an elected government last year. Since then, the military junta has reportedly intensified its measures, such as by reinstalling past genocidal policies to destroy the at least 140,000 Rohingya forcibly segregated in IDP camps in Rakhine state, as well as the over 460,000 surviving apartheid-like conditions across Burma. According to Women's Peace Network, in over 16 months, the junta has further detained and arrested at least 1,300 Rohingya, mostly women and girls, for allegedly violating administrative processes that strip their freedom of movement and the other basic rights. Such atrocities span decades preceding and succeeding the Burma's military's genocidal campaign in 2016 and 2017, which was determined as genocide and crimes against humanity by the US government this year on March 21st. Yet, the US government's moral act in recognizing these crimes is momentous. It provides hope to its victims and the survivors that their urgent needs will be responded with comprehensive action. These include holding the persecutors of the genocide accountable as a crucial step to protect Rohingya, support their safe and dignified return to Burma, and they prevent the recurrence of atrocities against them and across the country in the future. The Burma Unified through Vigorous Accountability Act of 2021, or the Burma Act, is another practical avenue through which the US leadership can further its commitment to never again. It's from our common hope for justice that I hope today the persecuted, the people will hold the perpetrators accountable. I today proudly stand with my friend Wai Wai Nu here and the entire Rohingya community. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Roshan. Our next speaker also has an extraordinary story. Ms. Pari Ibrahim is the founder and executive director of the Free Yazidi Foundation. She is a Yazidi woman originally from Iraq. She fled Iraq with her family in 1991 during the Saddam Hussein regime, eventually settling in the Netherlands. She created this foundation, extraordinary foundation, Free Yazidi Foundation, to provide support for Yazidi survivors in the aftermath of the Yazidi genocide perpetrated by ISIS. We have seen so much of the images around the persecution of all of three of these communities. We've heard from two representatives speaking for each other, and this afternoon we're hearing from Ms. Pari Ibrahim speaking for the Uyghur community.
Thank you very much. My name is Pari Ibrahim, and I'm from the Yazidi community. I'm the founder and executive director of the Free Yazidi Foundation, and I'm really glad to see a couple of people that I've worked with before and that are really champions for those who suffer immensely and are persecuted in other countries. So thank you very much. And of course, there's always more to get to know and meet. So this is also a great avenue for that, a venue for that. But obviously today I won't speak about my own community. I will speak about the suffering of the Uyghur community, because the persecuted stand with the persecuted. Because if today we don't speak, tomorrow it is our own community. And who will speak for us? The Uyghurs and other Turkic-speaking Muslim people of East Turkestan, officially known as Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region by the Chinese government, have been subject to the Chinese government's genocidal policies since 2017. Millions of Uyghurs have been targeted for their ethnicity and religion, detained in concentration camps, forced into labor, and have faced mass repression through surveillance and militarization of the Uyghur homeland. In the camps, Uyghurs have reported facing torture, indoctrination courses where they are forced to renounce their identity and religion, and experience mass sterilization and sexual violence, including systematic rape. The birth rate among Uyghurs has dropped more than any group in the world during this time, due to measures of forced sterilization carried out on Uyghur women. Outside the camps, Uyghurs are subject to constant monitoring. Communications are surveilled, and acts like going to the mosque or speaking to family outside of China can lead to imprisonment. Chinese state media reported that 1.1 million Chinese cadres moved inside Uyghurs' homes to monitor and supervise their lives, leading to sexual abuse of Uyghur women in their own homes. Uyghur women are forced to marry Chinese men under threat of detention for her and her family if they refuse. On January 19, 2021, the US State Department deemed what is happening to the Uyghurs as genocide, which the current administration has affirmed. Canada, France, Belgium, UK, Czech Republic, the Netherlands, and Lithuania have called these crimes against humanity and genocide after overwhelming evidence emerged. And just 18 days ago, on June 9th, the EU passed a resolution that Beijing was committing crimes against humanity and risk of genocide against the Uyghurs. This is a vindication for Uyghurs and the efforts to make sure the world sees what is happening to them in their homeland. What's happening to the Uyghurs is evil. China is trying to wipe out an entire nation, an egregious crime against the basic human rights to live faithfully and worship in freedom. What's happening to the Uyghurs shows the extent to which authoritarian regimes see religious values as a threat. Uyghur forced labor is so pervasive that you likely own an own product made with it, making us all complicit to China's crime to turn genocide into a profitable venture. Speaking for the Uyghurs is not only a stand against genocide, but also a defense of the future of the free and democratic world. It is from our common hope for justice that I today proudly stand with my friend Rushan Abbas here and the entire Uyghur community, but also with Wai Wai Nu and the Rohingya community. And one last thing about the Yazidi community that I do want to add. We are just a small Yazidi minority from Iraq. We don't have resources or anything, but we are up against the biggest cement company in the world, in France. You have to understand that if we don't rise now against those who have supported terrorism and those persecuting the people that have nothing, if we don't do that now, this will continue, and tomorrow the Holocaust Museum, the US State Department, they have to once again call that something is a genocide. And we need to end it where we said we will end it and never again. It's unfortunate to see every single day that we look up to a community and say, I am sorry, but we can't do anything. It is not acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Pari, Wai Wai, Roshan. Extraordinary stories, speaking for each other, the power of solidarity on display today. All of the communities we're indebted to who took meetings today, speaking for each other. I attended meetings with Muslims and Christians and Jews and members of the Sikh community and the Hindu community. It was extraordinary walking the halls of Congress today to see this coalition being built. So I hope that today you got a little bit of a taste of the power of working together. We're really delighted to have as our concluding remarks former Ambassador at Large for Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback. He served in this position from 2018 to 2021 under President Trump. Before that, extraordinary government career as a senator, congressman, governor of Kansas. He's really a passionate advocate in this space. And of course, his vision was to create this summit in civil society to engage with leaders and lawmakers. Sam, we've had a great afternoon, and we hope you could offer some concluding reflections.
Co-chair. Thank you, Amjad. Amjad does just such a fabulous job of this and just has really been an inspiration. I want to start off by thanking those of you here that work in the Congress. There is always more that needs to be done, and there's a lot to be done. But you're kind of the first stop that a lot of these groups come to anymore because you'll do something. Too many places won't do anything. They just kind of, I mean, you wring your hands for a while and nothing happens. You've done things and you're going to keep doing things. And this is critical that you do that. The Uyghur Human Rights Act and those issues have now started to really highlight and separate these economies between the United States and China, because they're saying you cannot use slave labor. And if you do, we're going to punish you in this economy. And this is important because it really drives the point in an economic sense. It hits the pocketbook. We need to hit the pocketbook on a number of these human rights, religious freedom issues. You need to pass the resolutions condemning it. That's good to do, but you need to hit the pocketbook. And we need to start doing this more often on these human rights issues. We call out genocide, and we should. We call out genocide against the Yazidis and the Christians in northern Iraq. And I've met with a number of people in that region, and it is horrific, the stories you hear. Horrific what's taking place. You gotta start hitting the pocketbook too. And that's what I applaud that you're starting to do, and please do more of it. Come to the summit. Katrina Lantos Swett and I are co-chairing this. She is fabulous at this. She's got generational experience. Her dad was just an icon to so many of us, to me, and what all he did. And she's carried on the legacy in every bit of way that he would be proud of bearing that name and bearing that work. But come to it and hear, and then let's figure out how we can act. I want to move these human rights issues, particularly religious persecution, which is, in my estimation, the largest scale human rights abuse in the world today is religious persecution. Now, I don't have a data point to give that to you on it, but I got a lot of examples. And I believe it to be true. This is the biggest one. We need to start moving this from resolutions to action points, and particularly on the pocketbook. That's the key thing. That's my sole point I want to make to you. Come to the summit. If you're a staff member, you're obviously comped. We just want you there. You're going to hear from a broad cross-section of people of all religions, of all different ideas, and you're going to have a lot of different ideas. Come and network. We want this movement to go grassroots. We want it to go global. We want it to be interconnected of all faiths. Amjad's done a great job here of getting the faiths speaking for each other. As we stand together, we will be able to win. Religion's the one institution that most governments try to put in a box. They try to hold it down. It's the one institution that can stand up to government. It's the one institution that people have enough heart and feel for personally that they will say, look, government, leave me alone. I am doing with my own soul what I see fit. Most people of various religions want to be good citizens in a government, but they also want to practice their faith. They want to be left alone to peacefully practice their faith, and we should stand and we should applaud that. We should applaud their work. Thank you for being here. This is an extraordinary panel. I know several of these people here. It's extraordinary because they're willing to speak out, and it's extraordinary, unfortunate for a number of experiences that they've had, and many of them can tell you far more stories. So I applaud them, and they inspire me, and I hope they inspire you to continue the work. It really needs to happen, and it needs to happen here in the Congress. That's what will really drive it on forward. God bless you all.
Thank you, Ambassador Brownback. We really appreciate and are grateful for this packed house, and we hope you enjoyed the summit. This will conclude our formal program, but please feel free to stay for a few minutes and interact with a lot of familiar faces, maybe some faces and folks you haven't met. Thank you very much. I'll have our speakers gather for a group photo, and then